Testing.
Good evening. Step Up to Truth welcomes you to the September 28, 2018 edition of its 2018 Virgin Islands Gubernatorial Fora. I am Elsie DeNova, and tonight I serve as your announcer and co-panelist. We're here at the University of the Virgin Islands Conference Center on the St. Thomas campus, and on St. Croix, we will be having a remote from the Great House on the St. Croix campus. Facilities, if you care to join us this evening, other than being present at any of the other physical facilities, are as follows. Simulcast on WSTA 1340 AM and WUVI 97.3 FM. There'll be a live stream at www.1340wsta.com, live audio and video stream at mdminc@livestream.com, and live audio and video stream at www.focusvi.com. Tonight's format takes the following presentation. The panel of Step Up to Truth will in fact posit all its questions to the gubernatorial candidates of Ray Fonseca and Warren Mosler. And I do apologize for the order mentioned, and let me correct that at this time. We're looking at the independent candidacy of Group Warren Mosler for governor and Ray Fonseca for lieutenant governor. The program is scheduled to run approximately 2 hours, beginning promptly at 6 and concluding promptly at 8. And for the period September 7th through October 26, 2018, we have the benefit of bringing the particular fora to you. At this time, let me tell you what the purpose of tonight's presentation is. Step Up to Truth is in fact providing an opportunity for the gubernatorial candidates of Warren Mosler and Ray Fonseca to speak to the people of the Virgin Islands when it comes to their perspectives, their actual approach and modality, and what they expect to be the outcome in addressing matters of a political nature here in the United States Virgin Islands. As we talk about Virgin Islanders having been marginalized within their own homes, we're looking to the team to present themselves and how best they will be able to bring about some measure of reconciliation and restoration to life and living in the Virgin Islands. I might remind you that the matters as they will be discussed here this evening are solely between Step Up to Truth and gubernatorial candidates Warren Mosler and Ray Fonseca. The University of the Virgin Islands has no part in accepting any responsibility for what will be discussed here this evening. A bit about the ownership rights of what you will be seeing, the work as it will be presented here this evening. It is solely the property of Step Up to Truth. You are to refrain from any recordings whatsoever of tonight's presentation. We're asking you at this time to turn off all, disengage, deactivate all electronic devices. And should you have a need to benefit from any of this information separate and apart from what you're seeing or witnessing here this evening, you must first receive the permission going forward from Step Up to Truth, and it must be in writing. Moderator for this evening is our illustrious Hector Alimo Francis, and at this time he will be presiding, and I will now turn the podium over to my colleague Hectito. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsie. Greetings to everyone. Again to the candidates, Mr. Mosler, Mr. Fonseca. Thank you for coming. And to those in the audience, also thank you for coming. We have just 3 main requests. Please refrain from applauding during the question and answers. That's 1. Number 2, as Elsie mentioned before, please turn off or mute your telephones or other electronic devices. And 3, there's a survey on your seat. Please fill them out at the end of this session. Thank you. As mentioned before, the reason we are conducting these forums is to get a more in-depth understanding of our gubernatorial teams and gain additional insights into their qualifications, ideas, visions, and leadership styles. We decided to interview the teams individually to afford the candidates a less restrictive forum with no time restraints. So you all could just relax and take your time and answer our questions. This way, again, you could relax and communicate with the public as best as you can. So with no further ado, let's get this session started, and we'll go directly to our first panelist, Mr. Clarence Tadman, with your questions.
Good evening to all. Good evening to you both, Mr. Fonseca and Mr. Mosler. My first question to Mr. Mosler, are you a Virgin Islander?
Well, I moved here in 2003, and I've lived here 15 years. I have nowhere else to live. This is my home. My wife and I, Elizabeth, we're living out our sunset years in paradise and expect to live them out right here.
Okay. And you feel that you have a sufficient feel for what we go through as a people, where we need to go as a people. You feel that you can bring that with your campaigning and being ultimately elected to governor?
Yes, I have a vision and I have proposals to get us there, and I present these as a matter of conscience. And if the voters like what they hear and accept that vision and accept the proposals and wish to go in that direction, then they should vote for me, myself and Ray. If they prefer somebody else's vision and someone else's proposals, then they should vote for that person. That's how it works. Can I?
That's it for now?
Yes.
Can I add something here?
No, you finished for now, Clarence?
For now I'm finished.
Okay, we go to Mr. Wayne Chinnery. Your questions, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. I direct my question to either of you or both of you. Going forward, or before we go forward in this discussion this evening, what do you perceive, or how would you relate the state of the Virgin Islands? First, as a territory, and then separated island by island. What is the respective state of each island, and what is the state of the Virgin Islands, in your judgment?
You take this, Ray.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Carwood. Good evening to the listening audience.
That's Mr. Chinnery.
Mr. Chinnery, I'm sorry. I still have Mr. Carwood in mind. Yes, good evening to the listening audience. We're pleased to have this opportunity to come before you tonight, the Mosler Fonseca team, to present to you our ideas to take this territory in a different direction, in a real different direction. To get right to the question, the 3 islands, the problems with the 3 islands and then together. I think I'll start with St. John first of all. I think St. John has issues with property taxes. They have issues with needing a central government facility. And St. John also has issues with representation, elective representation. St. Thomas, being that this is the central, where the government is located, I'll have to include the government. I think they have St. Thomas has problems with accountability, financial issues, and infrastructure. You pass around, you drive around the island, you can smell the sewage. I don't need to describe it with an adjective, but it's all day, all night, every day, every night. St. Croix, I think, I saved the last for best. St. Croix, I think, has issues with unemployment. The roads are terrible. There's not enough opportunities. There's a lot of land that's being underutilized. So I think those are the issues. And territorially, I think we have a problem in that we have a choice to make. There's a time that you must come together and choose a different path. So as a territory, right now, we have to make a decision. And what I recommend is each one of us, every male and female, go ahead and look in the mirror and ask yourself, are you satisfied? And make that change. We're asking you to vote number 7, the Mosler Fonseca team. Thanks.
Wish I could speak half as eloquently as Ray.
I wish I was a genius like him.
So it's a good team. So I sum it up as territory-wide, we're in a financial crisis. The Senate, year after year, promises to spend $600 million when they know they only have $400 million in revenue, so nobody gets paid. And then it's left up to the governor to who gets the $400 million. Because once you've promised everybody money, then the little money you have could go to anybody, and the governor gets to decide. And it just happens year after year. We've got accounts payable, $150 million that haven't paid a WAPA bill of 30-something million. We owe tax refunds, which is hard to comprehend that any territory would do that, since it's a requirement of the Internal Revenue Service. It's ultimately their responsibility. We could lose our taxing authority. But we owe almost $100 million and growing of tax refunds. And it's been done illegally based on USVI laws. Senator Donistorg passed a law way back when he was a senator about 10% of all revenues had to be withheld for this, and they just ignore the law. Okay, now when we go to the individual islands, Ray covered it pretty well. Let me go back to St. John. He mentioned the property taxes, and what distinguishes us is if we see something like that that's a problem, we have a proposal for it that we think makes sense, we think should be implemented. And if we didn't have proposals to solve the problems, we wouldn't be here. We're not just here to tell you the problems. Anybody can tell you that. So what I've proposed for St. John is that the GERS buy delinquent property taxes from the government. It's also a proposal for the GERS because it serves them both very well. The retirement system's average return has been 7%. The return on delinquent property taxes is 8%. So it's a better investment for the retirement fund than what they're doing now. They buy bonds anyway. Buying delinquent property taxes is the same as buying long-term bonds. The retirement fund has long-term liabilities, so they don't need, in fact, they wouldn't think about forcing somebody out of their house to get their property taxes paid. They'd much rather have that person live there another 20 years so they can accrue their 8% interest and then get the money when the house or the property is sold. So it relieves the social pressure of people being driven off their land by property taxes. Someday when the property is sold, the taxes get paid to the GERS and everybody wins. So that's a good example. He talked about the government facilities. They need a medical facility over there too. they're starved for medical facilities, especially in an emergency situation. You're stuck in St. John, you're in trouble. And a territory like the Virgin Islands, part of the United States, you shouldn't be in trouble because you're having a problem 6 miles away from help. But you know, I don't have to go through the examples. They've been making headlines. The next thing is the representation. St. John has never been represented in the Senate. They do not get to vote for their own senator. Now, they vote, but it's the other 2 islands vote also, so their vote hardly counts. Yes, the senator comes from St. John, but he's beholden to the people who elected him, which is mainly St. Croix and St. Thomas. And I remember when the senator from St. John, Craig, what was his name? Yeah, Bassinger, he practically lived in St. Croix. He catered to St. Croix because he knew that's where he was getting the votes, and he was a senator from St. John. So the unfortunate people, residents of St. John, have had no representation. Under our proposal, St. John would be its own district, elect its own senator, which would serve in the Senate to represent St. John. We proposed, and Frederickstead and St. Croix is in much the same position as St. John. They don't have any representation. They have unique issues. They vote for the same 7 senators we all vote for. The top 7 voters win, and not because they owe any allegiance to Frederickstead, and there's no one accountable to their needs. We've been proposing 3 districts on each island, east, west, and center, roughly equal population. So a place like Frederickstead, like St. John, will get its own senator. So we're identifying the problems in the different islands and within the islands, and coming up with solutions for those problems before we decide to run. We've had all these solutions well before we decided to run. If we didn't have solutions, we wouldn't be running. So let me see if I got them all here. St. Thomas, the accountability and infrastructure, that's right. St. Croix, I put a post on Facebook. It was the most popular post I ever put up. I said, we'll fix all the potholes. Simple as that, both, all 3 islands. Now, we already have people on staff who do roads, okay, and Ray's a construction person. We're building several miles of roads in St. Croix now. How much asphalt is there in 1 mile of new road? How many potholes can that asphalt fill? It's probably 1,000, right?
More than that.
Okay, so we have the asphalt, we have the manpower. We could sacrifice 1 mile of new road to fix every pothole on the islands, and then we could get that mile later, but we don't have to do it first. So it's not about resources or money, it's about management and priority, and which comes back to what I said for the territory. We have a financial crisis, which we'll talk more about later, and we have a management crisis. And Ray eloquently pointed out to how management and executive management is failing us at every level of government right now, all the way down in nearly every department. Thank you. Let me add one thing.
Okay, Wayne, you want to follow up, Clarence?
Yes, I would like to follow up. How does 7 senators, 3 from St. Croix, 3 from St. Thomas, and 1 from St. John, how do you reconcile that with 1 man or 1 woman vote? How do you reconcile that?
Okay, number one, you don't have to. It's not exact. And it's up to us as a territory as to how we want to do it. So it's not exactly, between St. Croix and St. Thomas, it's very close. It gives St. John a little bit extra, but they only have 1 vote.
Because
Yeah.
my sense
Yeah.
is that St. Thomas and St. Croix, dividing them equally in 3 geographically, doesn't relate to the population.
Well, they both have something like 40, 45,000 people, right?
I understand that, sure.
So if each district has approximately 12 to 15,000.
That's what I'm questioning.
Yeah. The 3
That's what I'm
geographic
questioning.
districts of approximately equal populations on each
That's what I'm
island.
getting, because I'm not sure that 3 districts, you can have a district where you may have 6,000 people.
Well,
or 5,000
you draw the lines so they're equal. So we drew the lines for St. Thomas, for example. St. Croix, it's easy, east, west, and center. You just make the the center a little fatter or a little narrower and don't cut up neighborhoods, and you can get equal populations or very close. St. Thomas, it looks more like a pie.
Excuse me, Mr. Mosley, please speak
Oh,
closer
yeah.
to the mic, please.
St. Thomas, the lines look more pie-shaped than they do vertical cuts, but it can be done. Yeah, and
Yeah, the intent here is to have 3 districts, each with more or less the same amount of population.
Right.
You know, it wouldn't be the exact to the, you know, to one, but it would be the same amount. It's not an issue of gerrymandering, to use a term. We
Right.
basically want to have it where, you know, the Senate is right now 15, and the government has reduced, the size of the economy has reduced, the size of the, you know, everything, the business, our gross domestic product, everything in the Virgin Islands has been reduced. And so the other thing, like Mr. Mosler pointed out, is that right now, if you have a problem, you can go to any one senator, any of the 7 on your island, for example, and all of them would have to address you, but there is no one particular senator that has to deal with the Tutu issues or the Bordeaux issues. So if you live in Bordeaux, you would have a senator in that district, because Bordeaux would be in the West District, that you can go to, and that specific senator, if he doesn't address the Bordeaux needs, will then have to face his community. Right now, you can go to any senator, and the Bordeaux people issues might not be addressed, but the Bordeaux people are not voting for that senator alone. So it's a different way of looking at it. You know, there's very different ways to look at it, but it's an alternative solution. Remember, the Virgin Islands people had voted several years ago in a referendum, and the people have voted to reduce the Senate to 9. So there's a lot of support.
yeah. Now, let me describe the electoral process that changes. So right now, you're in St. Thomas. How many senators are running? 15 or 20?
I think it's 21.
21. And you'll each get 7 votes. So if Ray and I were running for Senate, I would never say anything critical about Ray. He could have been the worst senator you ever had, corrupt, everything. I would never say anything bad, because one of you might like Ray and he might be your first choice. But you have 6 more votes, and I want one of your other 6 votes. So I won't say anything bad about Ray, because I'm not going to get one of your other 6 votes. And so when you have this at-large system on each island that we have, St. Croix and St. Thomas, you don't get critical discussion. You never see senators criticizing each other. They don't run against each other. They won't say a word. They can't, or else they're just going to lose the election. They won't be there. The successful ones know not to do that. So this is a structure that was imposed on us by Congress. It's not our fault. We're the victims of this structure. That's why we have a dysfunctional legislature. They set up a system where there's no accountability at election time, as I've described, and then when it doesn't work and we get dysfunctional legislature, they blame us. All right? Every other municipality in the states has a district system like we're describing. This is not something new. And I will guarantee you that if Congress imposed our system on any one of them, on Tallahassee, Florida, they'd wind up with the same problems we have within, one political cycle. It's an impossible system, and so we're proposing to change it to like a normal system like any other place has.
Before we go to ULC, I just want to follow up on this. You have any follow-up questions in this particular? Okay, let me get 2 follow-up to the candidates. There is an initiative going around now by the St. Croix retiree organization that does not reduce the Senate, but includes a representative for St. John. Do you all support that, or you against that?
So I signed that petition because I think it's an improvement, but it's a tiny improvement, and things could get a little bit better. But this is the way. What we've described is the way to do it right. So this is a baby step in the right direction. So it's better than not doing it. So I signed it, but it's not the answer.
Okay, and again, you're speaking about the legislature. So you as governor can't do legislation, you have to send it to the legislature.
Yes.
My question is, do you believe you're going to have enough support in the legislature to reduce the Senate? And if not, would you consider trying to put this proposal within a constitutional convention?
So I think if we propose it and the Senate does not act on it, and we propose it with the idea that if it's not acted on, it's going to be on the ballot, and it's going to be the senators are going to be accountable for not doing it, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
before, I'm not speaking about this initiative. I'm speaking about your proposal for 7 senators.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, so our proposal the Senate can approve it, and it can happen tomorrow if they approve it. If they don't, they have to run for re-election in 2 years, telling the population that none of them were approved it. And we will make a big issue of that. Okay, it will be public knowledge that these senators do not want to go in this direction. And if you do, vote for the senators who do want to go. And there'll be lots of candidates who will want to go in that direction. So the political pressure will be there only because it's the will of the people. In this case, you can bring the will of the people to bear. Second, we can go through Department of Interior, because Department of Interior, they're our guardians, is what I call them. They need us to do well. That's how they're rewarded. They are assigned to Virgin Islands as they're the wards, and they're supposed to be doing things to make us do better. And when they get judged every year, it's like, well, what happened? How come the Virgin Islands isn't doing better? What have you done? So we go to them, which I did 7 or 8 years ago, and explain what's wrong with the system. It's been imposed by Congress, and we need Congress to change the Organic Act to give us normal representation and not this thing they gave us, because A, it's dysfunctional, and B, they didn't give us a way to change it. The Constitutional Convention process does not work. We've proved that 5 times. Okay, and they've changed the Organic Act 3 times to try and make things better here. There's every reason to believe they would do this. We had the referendum in 2000, was it?
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'll let Ray pick up.
Yeah, the referendum, well, I think the interpretation was it was a non-binding referendum. So, you can take it back to the people and make it a binding referendum. The people always can reserve the right to make laws directly. So there's ways that it can be done, but basically, the VI has downsized. The government has downsized. Everything has downsized, and now I think it's a better way. It's a change. We would be in the same sync with how it is in the whole United States. That's how it's done in the United States. You have a district senator that is directly responsible for that particular area.
Look, this is our vision. This is what we're proposing. This is one of the reasons we're running, to get these things done, and this is what we're going to work to get done. We can't guarantee that it's going to get done, but we have every reason to believe that we're not wasting our time doing this, because if we're not in this just for the job. I mean, we both have jobs. I'm 69 years old. We're in it because we see what's going on. As a matter of conscience, we'd like to see positive change in this direction. We're presenting our proposals. If we get elected, it means the people are behind us in what we're trying to do. And then we're going to try and get it done. Our slogan is, it's not about getting the job, it's about getting the job done. And that's the whole purpose for running for office.
Okay, thank you for responses. Elsie, questions, please?
Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Mosler,
Yeah.
I heard you respond to the initial question regarding whether you were a Virgin Islander.
Yeah.
And I heard you, or understood you to have said that by choice you are. You were not born
Right.
and
I was
bred
not born here, no.
Right. You
So-
were not born nor bred here, but by choice you
right.
are. I'm a social worker by profession, and so my question is undergirded by my profession. I'm a bleeding heart. In the aftermath of the 2 Category 5 hurricanes we experienced last year, namely Irma and Maria, our people were traumatized. I'm a part of that trauma. Okay, we are truly traumatized. And one of the manifestations of trauma happens to be a lack of trust. Okay? I've heard your name before. And even tonight with you responding and saying that you're a Virgin Islander by choice, I don't know what the heck that means. All I know, and I'm not speaking only for myself, All I know is that whomever becomes the leader in the Virgin Islands, whoever assumes that leadership position, we want to feel sure that that person is there and is there for us. When we look at you, you look white to me. Are you white? Or you a Caucasian?
Yes.
Do you have any Negroid affiliation? Are you black in any way?
No.
The majority of people who reside in the United States Virgin Islands, black skin, Negroid. Roots go all the way back to Africa. The question then, Mr. Mosler, becomes, who are you? When I listen to introductory statements of who you are, you have it made in the shade, Mr. Mosler.
I have what?
You're a philanthropist. You have given wholeheartedly to the Virgin Islands. Okay, you seem to care, and you've so stated. You're running with a serious colleague and prior co-worker of mine, Ray Fonseca. I happen to have a lot of respect for Ray. I love Ray.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay? I love it. He's
I love you
affable
too.
and approachable. He means a lot to me. So with Ray putting himself with you, I began to take attention. But the question is, are you going to be there for us? What more do you want added to what you already have? What more do you want? I want to feel you, Mr. Moser. When I go to the poll, I want to know what I'm voting for.
Right. So look, I'm a person of conscience. I need to be able to sleep at night. And I have ideas. I see people who, I can pay my WAPA bill, okay? I don't care if it's $50 or $1 a kilowatt. But I see people suffering, and it bothers me. But that's not enough. And then I look at WAPA and I say, you know what? We can do this, this, and this bill's going to get cut in half. And now I can't sleep at night unless I put that out there for people. The same way if somebody's drowning, that's the example I use, and I'm a good swimmer, I have to say, okay, look, I'm a good swimmer. I'm offering to help if you'd like me to go swim out and try and help that person. Otherwise, I can't sleep at night. I can't just walk away and not look. All right, and so I see the school system and I have ideas. I see the lack of funding, and that's what I've done. I've made money for people my whole life. I can do this. If I don't offer to help, I can't sleep at night. I'm a progressive economist. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard the term, but you're free to elaborate.
Yeah, and I'm probably, globally, maybe the leading progressive economist right now. I've been working 25 years on what's now called, people are now calling it modern monetary theory. My colleague of 22 years, Professor Stephanie Kelton, was Bernie Sanders' chief economist. The ideas of Medicare for all and universal free education and how to fund those, those all came from me. I provided the financial support that got those ideas going and that are moving them now. And you can read about it. You can go online and read about what I've done. And so in Italy, I've been doing similar things with people there who read about me, called me. Elizabeth and I went out there. We've been going out there for 4 years. And now both parties in the coalition are now Mosler economics, and they understand what's causing the humanitarian crisis out there and how to fix it, and they're trying to move in that direction. None of this is easy, okay? But that's what I do. And I understand that you walk into a place, we're living here 15 years, it might be 30 years, it doesn't matter. People who are new to who you are, it's being mistrustful is a healthy thing. You don't want to just trust everybody who comes down with things, because they could be selling you something very bad.
History will note that we have in the past trusted people.
That's right.
And that's why we are where we are today.
Yeah.
No place.
So look, I do the best I can. I present my proposals. My history is open. This is step up to truth. I just remembered this. One of my proposals was to promote truthfulness in government, that all candidates and people who win office, but as a candidate, should be sworn in. I solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Okay. That way, if I tell you a lie, it's perjury, and you can send me to jail. Right now, any candidate they can lie all they want. Oh, that's just politics. I was trying to take that out of politics and require that all candidates nationally be sworn in to get serious about it. So I've got my campaign finance reform bill, all kinds of things. I my proposal in 2010 was to help the economy, which also helped our economy tremendously, was to cut the FICA tax. I wanted to eliminate it, but, and I went up to Connecticut to run for Senate as an independent to promote this. Being a candidate for senator in Connecticut, I was there for 4 or 5 months before we left. We left just before the election. I was able to get on television, on news shows and talk shows, and I wrote for the Huffington Post, which is a progressive newspaper at the time, I think it still is, on why we should do this, to solve the crisis. Instead of, what this would do is for every family, working family, the average family making $50,000 a year, husband and wife, their take-home pay would go up by $650 a month by eliminating this tax. It was the most regressive, punishing tax we had, taking money away from people's first dollar. And then people would have enough money to make their mortgage payments so there wouldn't be a banking crisis and there'd be no bank bailouts. People could have made their car payments and the car companies wouldn't have needed bailouts. And so I was trying to get this done. It got to the White House through President Obama's aide, which I think his name was Ricky Love, who I knew through one of Representative Cleaver's aides, Troy Nash from Kansas City. And the president liked it. And he proposed it, and instead of cutting the whole thing, they only cut 2%, and it passed in 2011, and everybody here got about a $35 increase in their take-home pay, which went away 2 years later when they let it expire. It saved the Obama administration for those 2 years because it kept the economy from being a whole lot worse, and it was the only legislation in the Obama administration that passed on a bipartisan basis. Republicans and Democrats voted for it. That didn't happen with any other legislation. Okay, and so that's the kind of activism I've been doing for, I don't know, 25 years now. So it's not like I suddenly walked into this, but nobody here knows that because I suddenly walked into this, happened to be where I moved. So I understand your concerns. We can only do what we can do. We can talk to people. You can talk to our friends and neighbors, people who've known us for 15 years now. You can talk to some of the organizations in St. Croix and St. Thomas that we've been working with. And if it's not good enough, it's not good enough. I accept that, and I go on as a good citizen of the Virgin Islands.
Tell me about your relationship with Ray. How do you know Ray?
Okay, so I'll say it first, and Ray can say it again in case I got it wrong. But I'm announced that I was going to run for governor a while ago, as my ideas came on, and then I would get calls from people. Oh, I hear you're running for governor. Well, I've been reading about you. I want to support you. I want to do this, and different people would do this, and some people started calling and talking on a more regular basis, and one of those was Ray. He was working a job at St. Croix. I don't know how he ran into my name and saw all these things. Say, yeah, this stuff makes sense. Maybe we got a candidate that makes sense here, and he wanted to support me, and he wanted to help me find a lieutenant governor's candidate. So he's recommending people, and I'm out talking to them and interviewing. They're pretty good, and maybe they didn't want to do it or something. And something happened. I remember talking to him, and I'm going like, "What am I doing? What about you? Why don't you want to?" Because I just assumed he had a good job. Ray was making a lot of money. He's very successful, and I just assumed he didn't want to do that, or he might have said something earlier. And he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And I think after working together for 3 or 6 months, he came to the same conclusion that we're trying to find people. He's better than any of them. But you never consider yourself a politician at all. But go ahead, you tell the story. See if we tell the same story.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Nova. You judge a man or a woman by their deeds. And I want to tell the people, Warren Mosler, judge him by his deeds. After the hurricane, Warren Mosler donated his boat to the government of the Virgin Islands. FEMA, VITEMA used his boat to transport men and material between here, St. Croix, St. John, back and forth. Warren Mosler never asked for 1 penny for the staff nor the gasoline. In addition to that, Warren Mosler donates the Art Museum in Frederiksted, St. Croix, $12 a year. He donates 600 acres of land to the University of the Virgin Islands for the agriculture program. He donates to the Batters Women's Shelter in St. Croix, a building. They have a thrift shop, also a church in St. Croix. He donates the boxing gym to Julian Jackson, Tony Westline Production, Ortiz Vele, all those guys. He pays for the equipment, the light, and the water. But let me tell you, the reason why I decided to run with Warren Mosler is not for his donations. The guy is a financial genius. Warren Mosler, listen, I'm telling you, Mr. Nova, this is the best opportunity that I see the Virgin Islands have, because I have a pain in my heart too, where my sons are in the States, you know, they're educated, but they cannot come back here because they are making more money. The cost of living is less in the United States. It's better off for them financially. You know, my mom that has Alzheimer's disease, I had to send her away to be with my sister because mom can get a better treatment in the States. We need to improve our medical, our education. There's a lot we need to improve. And a lot of our problems in the Virgin Islands start with finances and accountability. And Warren Mosler is an honest guy. As a matter of fact, the Mosler Fonseca campaign, I have never went to anybody, not even my brother or sister, asked them for 1 penny. We have never wrote a letter for donations. This campaign, we have to make some tough decisions. So we have specifically stayed away from that level of donations. Nobody in our camp donates to us because we have to make some decisions, and those that donate to campaigns have a vested interest. So there's nobody, for example, if you own a gas station, I'm telling you right now, Fonseca is going to challenge, why is gasoline 82 cents more on St. Thomas than it is on St. Croix? I am saying that that needs to be looked at. Warren Mosler is a financial genius, and he is an honest guy. We are going to fully fund the forensic lab in the VIPD. We're going to install cameras. You know, we're going to get the hotels back in line. We are also going to challenge some issues where the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation has in effect redlined the Virgin Islands. JP Morgan and Wells Fargo have been directed to not make loans to the Virgin Islands. That affects us all. We need the best mortgage, the lower rates. That puts dollars in our pockets. Why are our property insurance rates higher in the Virgin Islands than they are in the British Virgin Islands? There's a lot of things that we need to do. And Warren Mosler, I'm telling you, I'm pleased to announce that he has the financial genius. Now, Martin Luther King, in his I Have a Dream speech, mentioned that he wants to see the day when his 4 little children are judged not by the color of their skin, yes, that's right, but by the content of the character. And that's how we do things in the Virgin Islands. We judge you by your character, your decency, and your qualifications. And what I have just outlined to you, the listening audience and our esteemed panel here, are Warren Mosler's deeds. And that's what I want you to judge Mr. Mosler on. Thank you.
Okay. You got follow up on that, Wayne?
Yes.
Okay.
In that vein, let me make an inquiry that should give us some information on the questions propounded by Ms. Danova. Mr. Moser, you say you've been here since 2003. Have you been directly associated with any of the administrations that were in vogue from 2003 coming forth? And tell us in what manner that those interventions would have been.
Okay, well, I've tried. I'll give you the exact details on what I have. I don't remember anything with the Turnbull administration, okay? But with the DeYoung administration, I had high hopes for Governor DeYoung. I thought he was going to be a good governor. And when the Hovensa shut down, I went with the president of the Senate to his office on a Saturday, and we met there. And I presented my proposals for what we could do with Hovensa at that point. And I had already talked to Brian Lever, who was president or CEO of Hovensa at the
Would
time.
you describe the substance of that proposal?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry for the
No, no.
interruption, but I didn't know.
Oh, no, I'm full disclosure. I'll tell you everything I know.
Okay.
There are no secrets. And it's going to be more awkward for you than for me when I start naming names and places, because that's what I do. And so what we talked about, my proposals were that Hovensa let us use their generators for power on St. Croix. They were a little bit more efficient than WAPA. They were centrally located, and they were already set up to use propane and butane. They could switch back and forth. And they had huge tanks by their docks there, and they could unload the big ships. Okay, now when we converted, we have little tanks in the middle of Christiansted, which is insane. I don't know if you've ever seen a propane explosion, but all Christiansted will be dead if that ever goes off. And these are the largest, what we're doing there. And we're bringing these small propane ships in through that reef all the time. When a propane ship comes into Boston, there's 4 Black Hawk helicopters and Coast Guard cutters for safety. We just got this one ship coming. Well, anyway, this was before that. But they had already set up for that. So it would have saved us $60 million a year back then, when that was a lot of money, which was more money than we were going to make if we had a new refinery come in. The money we would save on electric costs. And why would Hovensa do it? Because it would save, they wanted to run a storage terminal. They only needed 5 megawatts of power. Their smallest generator was 20 megawatts. It was highly inefficient. It was costing them an extra maybe $10 million a year to run a generator that was too large. So by selling power to WAPA, they were going to save $10 or $15 million a year, which made their storage terminal profitable. So it was win-win for everybody. We presented it. Governor DeYoung liked the idea. A couple of days later, I heard from a friend of mine working for the government that he liked the idea and they were going to do it. And a week later, he announced Hovensa either has to refine oil or sell it to someone else who will. So they rejected the idea. I don't know why. I never heard back from him. Subsequently, I've talked to Governor DeYoung about the bonds they were doing at the time. He was financing literally over $1 billion of bonds. And I showed him, because that was my business, I was in finance for a long time, how he could save $20 million in corporate finance fees. And he listened respectfully, and he did not care. Now, why someone would not care is, you can speculate on why not. It has the appearance that the $20 million was going somewhere else, but I don't know anything else except I know he just didn't care. And so, and then with Governor Mapp, I met with him before the election when he needed a donation. And we talked for 2 hours. Probably 3/4 of these ideas were discussed. He understood them. I had several more at the time that are no longer applicable. The opportunities came and went. And he never came to work with me. Representative Plaskett, she knew my ideas well. When she ran, the time she won, she said to me, if you drop out, I would make you my financial advisor. I said, okay, well, if I drop out, I'll drop out, but it's not going to be conditional on that, and I'll be your financial advisor anytime you want. And I've never heard from her. So the answer is yes, I have offered.
Were you engaged as a financier in any of the so-called development projects, hotel schemes, Out East End, Grape, I can't remember the names. But were you ever engaged in any such project, and did you make any such proposal to the government?
No, I did make a proposal to the GERS 7 or 8 years ago. No, it was before 2008, maybe 12 years ago, where I had the idea that we could build a golf course community on the south shore of St. Croix. It would use I had 500 acres of land there. I didn't want any money from the GERS. I wanted them to be the recipient. And the way it would work is that this community would bring down, there was room for 3 golf courses, and it would be about 400 people would come down. It was something like 130 or 40 for each golf course, 130 or 40 homes on each one. And the developers would bring people to live there who had incomes of $5 million or more per year, and paid income taxes of $2 million. By living there, we would get their $2 million. That would be $800 million for the government. I was proposing $400 million would go to fund the GERS, and the other $400 million would go back into the community to make it the kind of community that people with that kind of money would want to live in. And so if they came down there, lived in the community, paid their taxes, they would get their $5 million house for free. Because when they paid their taxes, we'd be getting $400 million to build the houses for them and to maintain the community. And then the other $400 million would go to the GERS too, which would make it more than solvent. I mean, it would work. So I presented it to the GERS, and they turned it down. I wasn't asking any money from anybody. When I'd gone for the golf course communities, I talked to Ian Baker Finch, who at the time was ESPN announcer. He had won the British Open in '96 in Florida. He was a developer. His two associates were, that he said he had with him, were Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player, and who were big names at the time. I don't know that they are anymore. And he was ready to go. I gave him $25,000, and he did a preliminary drawing, which I used for the presentation, and they were going to fund it all, and it just never happened. So I've tried. You know, again, if I have this idea for a community that can produce $400 million in net revenues that can be used to make sure our retirement system is secure, if I don't do something about it, I don't sleep at night. So from time to time when I've had these ideas, I've followed through and I've presented them.
And according to your statement, you have not been successful in putting any of these progressive measures forward with our government.
Not a single time.
Okay, let me,
I've been a total failure.
okay, thank you. Again, the questions earlier, you being a Virgin Islander and so forth, are really important because these forums is to get to know you better.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I can only tell you what I am.
Yeah, frankly
I'm a
speaking-
resident, and what my label is, I don't know.
Yeah, frankly
I
speaking-
don't make my own labels.
when somebody hear Mosler, they hear money. Mosler, money.
Oh, wow.
But I'm
I've
sure you're more than your bank account.
Yeah, I don't have as much as people think I have, but I'm okay. And I have a fair amount less than I had when I got here,
Okay.
because I've given it away.
Tell me, what attracted you to the Virgin Islands?
What's that?
What attracted you to the Virgin Islands?
So I had some business associates who had moved down here from the EDC program, and they said, you ought to take a look at it. It might make some sense. So I came down with Elizabeth and looked around, and we were sitting at the lounge at the Buccaneer going, I said to Elizabeth, I don't know, you think we could live here? And she goes like, yeah.
Okay.
So we had nothing to lose, and we came down. And, you know, look, if you're trying to sell wine, okay, and you've got a good wine and it's not selling, you don't lower the price, because then people think there's something wrong with it, okay? You raise the price. Oh, this is much better wine. It costs twice as much. So that's what I looked at the Virgin Islands. They lower the price by giving you tax benefits to come down here as if there's something wrong with it. We should be raising the price because it's a paradise.
So what were your first impression of how we govern ourselves here?
I looked at it, and it was compared to Beverly Hills or Boca Raton, Florida, or St. Bart's or something like that. It's very disorganized.
Disoriented?
It's disorganized. It's not tightly organized. Everything's not tightly manicured. You don't have neat curbs on all the sidewalks, and I like that. The way it is not bad for me personally.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm an independent type of person. I'm progressive, but I'm also don't like overly organized places. And
Okay.
there's a certain freedom when you can walk around and you can stop on the road and talk to somebody in your car. No, you can't do this in other places. And there's a certain friendliness, at least on St. Croix, I don't know about St. Thomas, where somebody's trying to pull out, you stop and people let you out and pull in and all that. And you walk into a room and it's good morning or good afternoon. And again, I'm 69 years old. This is the way I like to live. So I don't want St. Croix to turn into St. Thomas from St. Croix. So our proposals for St. Croix are different than for St. Thomas. I see St. Croix as the residential area where St. Thomas is the commercial area. It's kind of like Atlantic City versus Nantucket. And if you want the Atlantic City environment with razzle-dazzle and hustle and bustle and nonstop commerce and a good place to make a lot of money, tourists all over, the late night party nights, that's St. Thomas. And if you want what St. Croix has, which is bed and breakfasts and villas and small hotels, boutiques, and not much traffic and that type of thing, you go to St. Croix. If you try and, you can't make them in the middle. You can't make St. Croix a little bit like St. Thomas and bring in a cruise ship every day, because then you lose what you have. And you can't, and even from an economic point of view, you lose your ability to attract tourists who don't want that. So you got both kinds of tourists. So we have to, I see how we specialize. When you specialize, the total is much higher than if you don't specialize. And the total is what matters, because that's what funds all of our police, all of our education, and all of our public services. So you want to make the total as high as possible. And so I see that St. Croix should have the small cruise ships that come into Gallows Bay with 100, 200, 300 people looking for a little town to shop around in, rather than, and St. Thomas needs to be filled with 10 cruise ships a day. It's got the infrastructure, and that's what the people there are about. They have the shops, the more cruise ships, the better. So, and a lot of young people would prefer St. Thomas because it's a lot more active and more nightlife, and people like ourselves, a little bit older, would prefer St. Croix because it's more relaxed and you play mahjong with your friends out on the porch. It's a whole different lifestyle. And so we tailor our proposals for that. So our proposals, we have real proposals that can attract a big convention center to St. Thomas that nobody else has. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the source income, or you want me to do that. But I wouldn't think of that for St. Croix. But we have a sports tourism, which would work in St. Croix because we have the property, and it's the same principle. So why don't you do the hotels and I'll do the sports tourism.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, let me just go back to a little thing. Also, Warren Moses is a very successful businessman. He managed a $3.5 billion investment company for about 15 years, which was rated #1 by Lipper Analytical in the United States. So the guy has made money for countries, for institutional investors. That's what he does. He's a financial genius. Let's just take a look at the boat between St. Thomas and St. Croix. If you remember prior, the boat was getting a $500,000 appropriation subsidy to run the route between the Virgin Islands. Well, Warren Moser now runs the boat. He gets no subsidy, and he makes a profit and pays taxes to the Virgin Islands. So you can see the guys are.
And we only charge $50.
And it's only $50. And so, he's giving you a real economic price. He's still making a profit. The guy is a very good businessman. And part of the problems in the Virgin Islands is finances and accountability. And Warren Moser is a guy that does not mess with any gray areas. And that's why I'm running with him, because I don't mess with the gray areas either. This campaign is about making decisions that's going to be in the best interests of the Virgin Islands. Quickly, I want to point out that where the Moser Fonseca administration, we're not going to be asking for the current administration executive staff to submit letters of resignation, because that's not our management style. We believe there are good people in this administration, but if you lack the tools, the staffing, as Ms. DeNova can tell you, when she was the director at Mental Health, you cannot do your best. So we're going to provide the administrators, the commissioners with the proper tools and the funding to get the job done. Okay, now with the VI source income, right? The GERS, the unfunded liability, has been overstated. The problem is not as bad as it was. And here's the reason why. The Virgin Islands have a mirror tax system with the federal government. Basically, if the GERS pays someone a check for $3,000, well, guess what? that money, the tax portion, say you pay $1,000, that comes back to the government. So that reduces the unfunded liability. Another good example with the VI source income is, for example, the San Antonio Spurs. They have a payroll of $115 million. See, I'm learning well from Warren Mosier. I tell you, this guy is a financial genius. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to teach us Virgin Islands to be where we used to be. When I was growing up here, we were the epitome of the whole entire Caribbean. You know, financially, the Virgin Islands was well set up. So with the San Antonio Spurs, their payroll is $115 million, but they pay about $1 million a month taxes.
A week. $1 million
A week, I'm sorry, a week. See, I told you he's a financial genius. So if they come down here and they practice, then guess what? That $1 million a week belongs to the government of the Virgin Islands. So we're going to use the VI source income as one of the creative areas to generate additional revenues, and there's a lot more.
Right, so if they go train in Florida and they pay their $1 million a week in taxes, those taxes go to Washington. Florida doesn't get them. But if they train here, we get them. That means we can use that money to build a new stadium for them that Florida can't. Florida doesn't have it. All right, so we have access to the money they pay in taxes when they're down here, and so we can make arrangements with them ahead of time. Look, you come down here and train, maybe set up a 5-year contract to come down here every year for 12 weeks. We're going to get $60 million, plus their payroll goes up every year, so it's probably $100 million over that time. We'll use that money to build you a brand new $60 million stadium, okay, that can be paid for on time, a bond issue paid for out of your the tax money. And so if you come down here instead of Florida, we'll build you a brand new stadium, and you will own it. That'll be yours. Okay, and so we can offer that kind of an incentive to every NBA team, okay, to every other pro team, to every baseball team.
See, those kinds of arrangements
Yeah,
make me a little nervous, Mr. Mosler. They really do.
yeah,
Because, again, we're giving away a lot. We're giving away a lot.
well, what are we giving away?
We've got to build a stadium.
No, it's coming from their tax money. They're building it. They're
building it.
paying for it. Yeah, so you're the Spurs. You pay all your players. They pay their taxes to Washington. Washington, for the time they practice here, Washington gives the money to us. And in advance, we've said as we get that money, that will go to pay for the stadium. And
Yeah,
if you
it's-
don't come down here and practice and we don't get the money, you don't get a stadium. They will sign a contract agreeing to this, and they'll be responsible to be here and supply that amount of taxes. Otherwise, they're responsible for the expenses.
Yeah, it's a unique idea because remember, the
Yeah.
Virgin Islands pay no federal taxes. So the Spurs have to pay federal taxes. If they were operating, practicing in the Virgin Islands, the federal taxes comes to our treasury. It's a very creative idea. And in addition to that, being that we're generating that money, now we have additional revenues to go ahead and float a bond to build the stadium. So it's a double win for the Virgin Islands. And that can apply to any other baseball team because, you know, during the spring, you know, the winter time, we're excellent weather for them to come down here and train, and it provides other, you know, auxiliary opportunities for our youths that may want to aspire to be a professional baseball player. The scouts would be here, so they'll get another look. It benefits us.
Yeah, you know, plus when those people are down here training, they're spending money, a lot of money on the economy. So it's not just the tax money. There's all
Have we reached out to teams like the Spurs or the Yankees or the Mets? or any-
I have not, no. I can't make promises I can't keep.
No, I'm not asking you to make a promise. Just saying,
Yeah.
have we done it?
No, I can't. I'm not in a position to do that.
You know, only the government can do that.
Yeah.
I listened, Mr. Moser, to your analyses about economic possibilities for St. Thomas and St. Croix. I have a little problem. It's called St. John. I heard it's in the Virgin Islands, but there's a bigger name over it, National Park Service.
Yeah.
What have you thought about in liberating St. John or in turning it into an economic reality and possibility for the benefit of the Virgin Islands?
Right. So there's two things there. And One of them is we don't know what the people who live there actually want because they don't have a representative. So there's nobody speaking for them. You might have a small group that wants Caneel Bay to never open again, and another group that wants it to open immediately. And you have another group that wants development at the other end, at Coral Bay, and another group that's against it. And there's no way to get any kind of a community consensus because they don't have their representative. Once they're their own district with their own representative, I think it'll be easier to know what St. John wants. Now, to your larger point, that might not be what everybody else in the Virgin Islands wants. And that can be a conflict. They might not want any development, and we would like to have it a development for economic purposes, and that conflict will have to be reconciled. But look, we can deal with it either way. We've got to get the structure in place so we know what our options are. And with St. John, it's cloudy. Caneel Bay, if we want that to reopen, if the people want it to reopen, if that's got to be done yesterday. We can't be arguing over the national parks over a few $1,000s a month while we're losing $60 million a year in revenues. That makes no sense at all.
Yes, but if the national park, in fact, controls 75% of St. John,
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Well, it just means St. John, that's the USVI, is a smaller place. It's as if that 75% was another island. Like the British might control Tortola. We just don't have it. We have what we have. We have to play the cards we're dealt. We have 25%. And what do we want to do with that 25%, right? And we don't know what we want to do with that 25%.
And you're happy with that?
Well, not that I'm happy with it. I'm not. I mean, I don't think we should go out and take over the BVIs and take over St. Martin or take over the national
But
parks.
should we get back what's ours? Should we get back St. John? I mean, it belongs to the Virgin Islands. Can we get it back? Should we get it back?
Yeah, do we want it back?
Yes.
So we
I'll
can't.
say yes.
Well, we don't know that. That's what I'm saying. There's no representation to get a consensus of the people. You might want it back, but maybe somebody else doesn't. We don't know who we are and what we want because we.
Well, I
of
can
our
tell you
political
this. I
structure.
can tell you this.
Yeah.
I'll put
Yeah.
myself on this. There are people on St. John that can afford the $2, $3, $4, $5 million homes.
Yes,
They're perfectly happy with the way it is.
right.
But there are people on St. John who also make $15 an hour,
Right.
and they ain't happy with the way
Right,
it is.
right.
Now, how do we reconcile that?
Yeah.
I think that's what we're saying. The St. Johnians have to let us know. The St. Johnians, we might be a St. Thomian or a Crucian talking for a St. Johnian. But I'm uncomfortable too because I remember being on a tour a few years ago, and a park ranger had an accent that I couldn't understand them too well, and they would telling me about the rainforest and the Annenberg ruins, and I'm saying wow, this is a good job. I would at least like to see somebody talking like me doing those jobs.
Yeah. So look, when I first came here, as just my background, I look at the whole economy, and what I saw was a government that was turning St. Croix into St. John, because I was on St. Croix. The policies of the government are driving out the people, the working people, the people who raised families, and they were being replaced by people coming down from the States. And it was a constant, steady replacement process. And St. John had gotten to the point where it was more than half statessiders and less than half people who were from here and worked here. And this was, and I saw these policies of our governments that are elected by the same people. Every tax they put on was a tax on people who had nothing. They were taxing the people who had nothing the most. They never went after people with money when they raised a tax. The sin tax doesn't go after anybody with money. It goes after people who have nothing. Okay, and when they put surcharges on income taxes or whatever, they're going after people who have nothing, and they're driving them out. And the WAPA bill is a tax because government doesn't pay its bill, so the rest of us has to pay more. That goes to the government so we can pay its bill. It's just an indirect tax on everybody, and it's a regressive tax, and they're driving people out. And the population keeps ratcheting down, right? It's lower than when I came here by a lot. It's probably dropped 20,000. It's a big number. And it's causing what you're saying. Okay, so unless this policy is stopped and reversed, it's going to continue. The question is, do we want it to continue? We have maybe 80,000 people now instead of 100,000. I don't know. We haven't had a census. Do we want the population to grow? Do we want it to go down? These are political decisions that if you don't do it to yourself, somebody else does it to you. Somebody from somewhere, some developer will come in, buy the government, and get done what they want if you don't do it to yourself. It's happened in island after island. You go to the Turks and Caicos, the foreigners came in, whatever they were, I don't know where they were from, bought the government basically through the election process and just turned it into a Miami Beach. Okay, do we want that to happen? Well, if we don't, we better do something, because somebody will do it to you if you don't take care of yourself. You get caught napping, and it's an insidious process. Look at the process in St. John. Some family who's been there for a long time sells their house their land for $3 million and moves to Florida. They couldn't be happier. Okay, they feel like they won. Somebody in St. Croix sells their house that they paid $30,000 or $40,000 for $250,000 and leaves. They're happy. Okay, but the process is not making everybody else happy. And it's what American capitalism does everywhere all the time. And if you're not aware of it, you can't think about it, you can't control your own destiny. And I understand it. I've been trying to show that this is what's going on and that we can control our destiny, but we have to grab a hold of it and make some decisions, or else it's going to be done for us.
Yeah, and I'm a born Savanero. I grew up in the Virgin Islands. I'm one of those students that was a straight A student. Won a full scholarship, Florida State University. Came back home. Worked myself up. I became the CEO for the Virgin Islands Housing Authority. So I'm qualified. I got experience. As a matter of fact, like I tell people, Albert Bryan, who's the Democratic nominee for governor, I used to be his boss. I used to sign his paychecks. So I come with real skills. I remember when I was a young boy, talking about the gas station. Lindquist them had owned a gas stand down by Pucho Bar, where Myron Jackson was. There was gas station. The Virgin Islanders that own all the gas stations. We had the 7-Elevens, where, Mr. Green, all these people, all the local people had owned the gas station. We had owned all Main Street. We've been electing our own governors for the last 48 years, and in the last 48 years is when we have seen all of this drastic change. You can now count on one hand how many locals now own a gas station, and on Main Street, and down and down and down and down. And so, we've been electing our own people for 48 years.
Okay, Elsie?
To follow up, Ray, with what you're saying, how do we regain that? How do we get back on that even keel?
Yes, that's a good question. What we do is we elect the Mosler Fonseca team that is not taking any donations from anybody, not asking for any donation, and is going to restore real accountability and is going to make the tough decisions. Like I asked the people, don't vote for us because we're the most popular. Vote for us because we can get the job done.
That's right here.
Don't vote for Mosler Fonseca because we're your family and friends. Vote for us because we're going to balance the budget, we're going to put people back to work, and we're going to restore the Virgin Islands to the epitome of the Caribbean, the way how it used to be.
If you look at the economy here, the average wage is half the national average. Like, why? Why isn't it at the national average? Are we different or something? No. Okay, now I've gone into the detail, and I know why, and I know how to get this fixed so that our wages will be at the national average, which is roughly double. And that goes a long way to keep people from leaving when you can earn money. Most of the people who left have been driven out by opportunities. And look, okay, so for me, for education, our job is to educate our children so that they can leave and be successful anywhere in the world they want to go. And then we have to make our economy attractive enough so that they consider us as a place to come back to. We don't want to trap them here or capture them. We want to have them educated where they're qualified to go anywhere and do anything. But then we want to have the opportunities here that then attract them back. And so I look at it from that direction. How do we get this economy to do that? And when I talk about these other ideas like sports tourism, or we talk about a convention center. If we have a convention here with brain surgeons who come in, brain surgeons make $2 million a year. They pay $10,000 a week in taxes. If they're here for a week, we get that $10,000 if we ask for it and fill out the correct forms, which we haven't been doing. But that $10,000 is ours. We can then go to the hotel they're staying at, the Marriott, the Westin, Keneal Bay, if it's built, and say, look, you're bringing in these people who are bringing us $10,000 a week. We'll give you half of that as an incentive to get them to come here to begin with.
Yeah, but who
Yeah.
builds the convention center? That's what I'm
Okay,
saying.
so we'll give you an incentive of half of that to bring them here. So now they have this built-in money, okay, $5,000 a week to get this brain surgeon conference to come here. They can now compete with Las Vegas, with anywhere in the world. We have a massive competitive advantage. Once you have a competitive advantage and you're bringing these people in, now you have the basis for a tax incentive bond to fund a convention center. Now you can tie the funding for a convention center directly into the tax structure, like we do with the property taxes, for Home Depot or something like that.
But you know, Mr. Mosley,
Yeah.
I'm having a rough time with that analogy. You know, every time we've tried to say we're competing with a Vegas
Yeah.
or a Miami or any place like that, or a New Orleans, we wind up getting ourselves in big trouble.
Yeah, you didn't have a Warren Mosler in charge.
Oh,
Yeah.
not,
Look,
Warren Mosley notwithstanding.
yeah. They say you're.
That's a tough. That's a
They
tough
say
sell.
you're only as good as your. We have an expression: you're only as good as your next trade.
Okay.
And so I'm not going to tell you that because I was successful for these years, I'm going to be successful for the next time, because I know that it's not necessarily the case. But if you look at our options right now, it's a real risk that on day one, when Ray and I get in after we win, we're going to walk into the office, and there's going to be 4 people from the federal government there, one of them sitting at our desk saying, oh, you go sit over in the corner there, okay? You've got a $200 million structural deficit. You have no cash. You can't meet the payroll this week. We've called in the National Guard, for the islands, and we're in charge here. Sorry. Okay, it's kind of what happened in Puerto Rico. You've got $150 million in unpaid bills. The hospital has just shut down. The sewers have flooded the streets. It's over. Sorry, guys, you had your 50 years. We've taken over. That's, if that happens, okay, now we have to go to Plan B. But it's not impossible, because what we're seeing now, I call it a scorched earth policy. There's not, they've used up every possible line of credit. They can't borrow anything. They've strung out the vendors as far as you can get. The nurses are buying their own thermometers. How much worse are you going to get there? The teachers don't have desks, and they're keeping books and things on the floor because there's not even a shelf. We've got all these billions of dollars, and we don't have $100 for a bookshelf. You know that expression, water everywhere and not a drop to drink? You're out in the ocean, and you're dying of thirst, and there's water all around you, but you can't drink it. Okay, that federal money is not there to support our government and our economy. It's there to buy infrastructure. Your father can buy you a brand new car, and if you don't have the money for insurance and gasoline, it just sits there and you can't use it. And that's what we're up against.
How feasible is it to restructure the Virgin Islands and its government to begin the type of work you're talking about?
Right now I think it's feasible, but we don't have the real numbers, but go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was going to talk about the restructure. And one of the decisions the Virgin Islands has to make, right, is right now we have $175 million in reserve to ensure that we're not defaulting on the bond. Which of the teams that's running for government right now do you believe the federal government will have the confidence to return that $175 million to the Virgin Islands, or to either reduce our debt or deposit it in our general fund? Which of the teams can restructure our bond debt to save about $50 million each year in interest expense? Which of the teams do you believe are going to deposit the 10% every week of your income taxes that are collected, so that come April 15, you will have your tax refund on time. We have to make a decision which of the teams are going to be able and can get that done.
I'll give you a specific. Last year, WAPA, we've got new generators coming in. Nobody would lend us the money for those generators, so they went to a private lender in the States somewhere, and they borrowed money at 15% interest, $85 million, to do that. And it made sense to do it because you save enough on fuel, but it makes a whole lot more sense when you pay 5%, right? So I looked at it, and I said, have you, because I know Elizabeth Armstrong, she's the head of board of directors of WAPA, chairman of the board, and I know Jerry Groner and these people. I said, have you considered payment in kind bonds? And they hadn't thought about that. And I explained what they are. And they said, okay, that might be, because that's going to cut your interest rate down to 5%. They're called PIK bonds, P-I-K, payment in kind. And I come back later and I asked what happened a month later. And they said, oh, we sent the proposal on to the governor and we've never heard back. So we're talking about saving 10% interest, which is $8.5 million a year. Now that puts a lot of books on the shelves instead of the floor and cleans up a lot of mold and fixes a $300,000 air conditioner that needs to be fixed in the operating room so the hospital can function. I mean, these are $8.5 million bills that are like big chunks of money around here. And they're just throwing it out the window because it's not what they know how to do. It's not what they do. A payment in kind bond means you tell the bondholder, if WAPA doesn't pay you, you can deduct it from your electric bill.
Do you believe WAPA should be sold for private interests?
Okay, so we tried that with Innovative, and it didn't work out so well. Okay, you can be public or private, and you can do it the right way or the wrong way. A public company done the right way can be very good, and done the wrong way, we see what happens.
It's a public company now. What are your
What I'm
recommendations?
saying
to
is,
make
if you privatize, it can be as bad or worse, depending on how you manage it. So if you don't know how to manage your public company and then you privatize it, you're probably not going to know how to regulate your private company, which is what happened with Innovative. That was privatized. We had a private phone company. It was a disaster. I mean, they bled us dry for, I don't know, $50 million a year or something for a long time because we didn't know how to regulate it. So you have to know how to either regulate a private company or manage a public company. They're both highly specialized skills. And if you do it wrong, it's going to be bad. So I can't tell you which is better. It depends on how you do it, right?
So right now, WAPA need better management.
Yeah, well, I think, I know Larry Kuffer, who's in there now. He came from Hovensa, and he's a good, capable manager. But it's only been a few months. And, they say to get out of a hole, first you have to stop digging. And we're deep in the hole and we're still digging, and I'm sure Larry's working on stopping the digging and then getting us out. Hopefully he has enough time to do it. So I think we've got okay management in WAPA, but he's not a finance guy, so we have to, I can work with him on restructuring the finance to give it a start. And I have other proposals for WAPA. The biggest problem with WAPA is WAPA's fixed cost is $150 million a year. They have to pay that no matter what to keep the lines up and to keep the lights on for themselves. And that gets spread out among all the ratepayers. So if everybody leaves the grid and goes solar, and you're the last guy on WAPA, how much is your bill? $150 million, right? So what you have to do is divide that up among as many people. We have to expand the output, expand the sales. But it's been going backwards. We're down to 71 megawatts, last I heard, of total between the two islands. You're going to see the bill go up and up and up. And as the bill goes higher, people leave the grid and go solar and whatnot, and so the bill goes higher because now the $150 million is spread among fewer and fewer people until it's just you, and then you have to pay $150 million. Okay, and so we're going the wrong way. There's nobody talking about this problem. The graph looks like this for price, because the higher the price goes, the more people go off. So the higher the price goes, it's a disaster. And how do you reverse it? Okay, so we've got a whole proposal to reverse a problem that nobody's even talking about.
Mr. Fancy. Go ahead, Wayne, go ahead.
I heard one of your early political advertisement, and it was concerned with companies called Arclight and Limetree,
Yes.
and
Yes.
our government's decision to do business with them. Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
of what you detected
Yeah.
with what was happening
Yeah.
and what eventually happened, and who was engaged
Yeah.
in selling the Virgin Islands out?
All right, so I'm going to abstract a little bit for time. So ArcLight had a contract with us from 2015, and let's just say it was in place. And they had a tax rate of 17% or something, 17.5%. And they were perfectly happy to go ahead and start refining oil at that rate. Now, how do I know that? They had already spent $44 million, as they testified, to restart the refinery. They'd been doing it for 6 months. They had, 600 or 800 people there working on the restart. They'd already ordered the modular homes, and they were in the process of being delivered. So they were already restarting the refinery. They were up against a deadline of 2020, where if they didn't restart by 2020, they would have to scrap it. They'd have to deconstruct it, they called the refinery. And that might have meant bring it back to grass and trees. I don't know, but it's a multi-billion-dollar project to do that. And so they were going ahead and refining. Now, why the negotiations? Well, one thing they needed was a change in the legal structure so that the new refinery was separate from the oil terminal, but that could be done without a new contract. They didn't need a contract for that, but that was part of it. But that's not the important part. And so I'm looking at this, and what's the explanation of our government? The explanation is, when the tax laws, federal tax laws dropped, the corporate tax went from 30 to 20 or 21 at the end of the year, suddenly this 17% wasn't competitive, because 17% was competitive against 30, but not against 21, so they needed to drop to 12.5 to maintain, competitiveness. I'm thinking that is a bunch of nonsense. If you're going to refine oil and make a profit, whether you pay 17% on the profits or 12% is not going to affect your decision to refine oil. It might be a lot of money, but it's a big business, and that's not, you wouldn't say, if I only have to pay 17, I'll refine oil, but if I have to pay 12, I'll refine it. If I have to pay 17, I won't. It's just not how a business thinks. They would pay 20, they'll pay 10, whatever it is. It's just because you're only paying the tax on your profits. You're still making a big profit. You're making $100 profit, whether you have to pay 17 cents in tax or 12 cents. Doesn't affect your decision. You're still going to want to make that profit, $100. So I'm thinking, what could the reason be? And then you look at the contract, and you see under the new contract, our government gets $70 million up front. So why would ArcLight want to do that? Well, then I say, well, wait a minute. The story they're telling us, the story they told the Senate, the story ArcLight and the PFA colluded on, got together and decided to tell the Senate, including their lawyers who told the same story, was that, we need to do this contract. If you don't drop it from 17 to 12, we're not going to be able to refine oil. Okay, that was a lie. And Senator Roach, Tregenza Roach, cross-examined Val Collins on video. I've got it on my Facebook page. And he used every lawyer technique and backed him in to admit that they had lied to the Senate and deceived the Senate deliberately to get their vote. And he was just disgusted and walked away. To me, that is called corruption. What's the difference is if you bribe somebody to get your tax rate down, or you lie to the Senate? You're a private company, you lie, you get half the government to lie to the Senate so he can get his $40 million payday loan. This is called bribery. Legally it's worse than bribery, right? And here we are pointing this out, and who else have you heard? All these people are supposedly anti-corruption. Here's the biggest corruption I've seen since I've been here, okay? This is bigger than the Alpine corruption. And nobody says a word. And we're kind of mystified by why. We can guess, but why aren't they saying anything? You've got candidates who say, I'm the anti-corruption one. No, here it is, say something. Nothing. It's like, okay, so let me get back to it for a second. So to me, the narrative that makes sense is that the governor wanted money up front, in front of the election, to be able to meet payroll and expenses, because we're so far behind on the bills. And so said to ArcLight, okay, we've got a contract, you're okay, but I want money up front. What do we have to do to get it? It's like, okay, well, we'll buy your land for $30 million, which was a good price for the land. They needed it anyway. And we'll give you $40 million through prepaid taxes, which is a loan. And you pay us back at a 10% rate, plus you lower our taxes from 17 and a half to 12 or whatever it is, which will save us, they estimated, $400 to $500 million a year. So we get $40 million, we pay back 10% a year, which is a pretty good rate anyway, and they deduct it from their future taxes. So they'll, we have to pay back the $40 million plus interest, plus another $400 or $500 million through reduced revenues. Now, we still get 12%, and it's still a big number. And the governor says, what's the matter? You don't like us? You don't want us to refine oil? We're getting $600 million. It's like, that's not the problem. The problem is we were getting $1 billion if we had done nothing. All of a sudden, so you can get your payday loan, we're dropping it to $600 million, and you lie to the Senate to get the vote. That's the problem. Okay, and that's where we stand now. Do you have any questions? I don't want to keep going if I'm losing anybody here.
No, we're
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, so it's very easy to resolve. We go to Limetree, not Limetree, we go to ArcLight, $20 billion company. We say,
How does sign of PEC fit into that arrangement?
they had a contract, I believe, with them to store oil. And I don't think it was anything more than that.
They're not parent company to ArcLight and
No.
Limetree?
What ArcLight is, it's private equity, and they set up funds to do certain projects. And so they might have 10 different funds with, $2 billion each in them that will go out and invest in different energy projects around the world. And the Limetree was one of them. The Limetree Terminal was a project they set up and put in $1.5 billion or whatever it is of investor money. They have salesmen that go out and talk to investors and say, here's a good investment, it's called a Limetree, and they put $1.5 billion in and then they invest.
Which was one of the other insinuations that I seem to get from your commercial and your discussion, that we were rarely properly used with people pretending to be advancing money that they can only go out and collect, leverage
Yeah.
against your promise to let them do what they're
Right.
going to do.
So when the deal was announced on July 3rd, I posted on Facebook, one thing you want to understand is that it's a private equity company. They might not have the money at that point, and they might need our yes vote, our approval, to then go back to their investors to get the money. The investors might have said, well, I like the deal, but until you get Senate approval, I'm not going to sign. And so it might have been contingent on Senate, but I didn't know that. They might have had the money, but I've just posted because I know how private equity companies work. They may or may not have had the money. It's not. Now we found out they don't. They needed some kind of partner. But I'm pretty sure they have people who are interested enough for them to go through all this trouble, but I don't know how far it's going to get. Now, again, I think a friendly call to the partners saying, look, here's what happened, and I tell them this story. We know your company doesn't do business this way. You're a big international company. You don't go into small territories and try and scam the government to get a contract. That's not how they don't. They don't work that way. Okay, but that's what happened. How about you just put the tax rate back where it was at 17.5 and leave everything else alone, and we'll walk away, we'll all be friends because we need the refining and we need the income. And, that would be the way it would have gotten done if it had been done above board. And I'm 99% sure they'd say, thank you very much, raise the tax rate and walk away, because the consequences to them of getting involved in this kind of a legal battle with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's just a nightmare. So I think it's in our best interest of both of us to just agree to put the tax rate back up, give us back our $500 million, and move on.
Is refining still the kind of business it was 4 decades ago?
Yes, in that it's cyclical, it's volatile. One year you make a lot of money, the next year you lose a lot of money. It's unpredictable, and that's why they come and go, and that's why the refineries close all over the world. Then all of a sudden they all reopen, then they close, and the profits are way up, and then there are huge losses. It's a very volatile business.
As a progressive economist,
Yeah. I would, look, that would be my last choice for economic development. I don't think anybody, I mean, does anybody think that if we put the refinery on St. John, that property values would go up? No. It's because people don't like them. They're ecological disaster. They're a social disaster. But if you're desperate and you've tried everything else for 4 years and you're about to default on all your obligations and you got one last, you know, you do things out of desperation. What did you say? If a mother needs milk for the children, you know, you do what you have to do.
Are we quadrupling, tripling, doubling the environmental impact
Sure.
by restarting a refinery?
Yes, and we have a risk with the new Republican administration. They're dropping, you know, the protections one at a time, right? Rapidly, they're rolling back all the EPA protections, and so who knows what the next one they're going to roll back is, and that it's going to be illegal for them to do to us. Federal law is going the other way now on environmental protection.
Mr. Fonseca, you mentioned earlier about banks not providing loans to the
Again,
SVI.
that was me personally where I've applied for these loans, and they've told me.
Yeah. The Virgin Islands has been redlined by the regulators, and they've been told not to give loans. Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan do not give loans to the Virgin Islands. So if you was to go to them and you say, well, I have property in the Virgin Islands, I want to use that as collateral for a loan, the answer will be no.
This is my question to you, Mr. Fonseca. As Commissioner of Banking and Insurance, what do you intend to do about this?
Well, we obviously going to have a conversation with, we're going to work with a delegate to Congress. We're going to work with Congress, Interior Department. That has to be removed. That is unfair. It's, you know, we are the United States also.
It's illegal.
Yeah.
It's against federal law.
Yeah. And that will put money in all of us that has a mortgage, the Virgin Islands pockets, because it, in effect, would lower our mortgage rates. That practice has to stop. You know, there's certain things. We are United States also. And so that red lining is illegal. It has to stop.
Mr. Fonseca. Mr.
Go ahead.
Fonseca,
Elsie?
I want you to give me the Sesame Street approach. Tell me exactly redlined and by whom. Walk me through that process. How did that happen?
Well, banks have to comply with the FDIC, the regulators. And the regulators sometimes, for specific reason, will tell a bank, well, listen, we've looked at this situation, this company, et cetera, they are not loan worthy. And so it's called redlining. And the Virgin Islands have been placed in that category. We've been redlined. So we cannot get those loans. And we need those loans because those are better rates than we currently get. So we have to challenge that. And we have to go to the feds.
I'll show you how it works. I talk to my banker. I say I'd like to borrow some money. I have this property in the Virgin Islands. It's the Innovative Building. It's a AAA building there. It's rented out to Innovative and Liberty, group of doctors and surgeons. Everybody makes their payments. Net income is $50,000 a month, $500,000, $600,000 a year that can be used towards a loan. How much money can I borrow with this building as collateral with a first mortgage? And he says, do you have any property in the States? He won't even answer. I said, well, what about the property there? He says, well, what do you have in the States? I said, what about I said, you can't lend in the Virgin Islands, right? He says, well, yeah, that's right. And you pin him down. I said, look, I owned a bank for 25 years, so I know what these guys are up against. I said, look, I know a regulatory problem when I see it because that's not legal, but I know it's not you. I know it's the regulators. And he goes, he agrees with me. He goes, yeah. So do you have any property in the States? They don't want to go there. They don't want to talk about it. And I've talked to Bank of America. I talked to Wells. I talked to BBVA, the last one, and they will not even discuss properties here. So and by redlining, what they mean is they take a map and they draw a line and they say anything over there, no matter what it is, we're not going to loan because of the geographic location.
If you go online, Mr. Nova, you know, they got that Rocket Mortgage, for example. They give you these quick loans. there's no category for the Virgin Islands. So once you give them your address, you are out of the system. You can't get a Rocket mortgage loan. All of these things, you know, they have to be challenged because it's not legal. So we're gonna do that. You know, we're gonna also deal with the insurance fund, but we hadn't gotten the question
So,
yet. So
you know, I forgot about before I sold the bank, you know, it was 2013. I made a loan down here. The bank was in Florida. And it was maybe 10% loan to value. So if the value of the property was $10 million, the loan was maybe $1 million, and the income was very high. It was as good a loan as you can possibly get. And the regulators were furious. And I was like, what's your problem? Because, I'm fearless. They did not like me at all. I said, what's the matter with this loan? Look at the coverage ratios and this and that. And they couldn't say it's Virgin Islands, right? Because they know that was illegal. But they said, we don't want you to make that loan, and we're going to classify it. I said, and classified means call it a bad loan. And I said, well, with these ratios and that, and they had a meeting and they decided to make an exception and not classify this loan. But it was interesting to watch them squirm about the whole thing. And most bankers wouldn't go through that because they can make life miserable for you at the rest of your bank and they don't care about breaking the law. They broke the law with us several times in Florida as our Florida bank. And we have no recourse at all. You can't file complaints. You can't sue them.
Mr. Mosler,
Yeah.
you stated that as governor you would refinance our public debt
Yeah,
at lower interest rates.
yeah.
Can we do that without the ability to float more bonds?
We can't get new money, but we can refinance the old money. And so I had a way to do it, and then a better way came up. And when I sent an email, I sent a text to Governor Mapp back in November 8th when he was going to Washington, and said, look, I'd like to go with you. I'd be willing to, I'd be happy to go with you, to work with you, because they're going to be talking about our finances. And, it'd be good to come up with ideas on the spot rather than have things happen and then have to undo them later. I never heard back. But what happened was they gave us these community disaster loans, and they made them senior to our RUM bonds. Now, that was the time to go to the federal government. It's not that it's too late now, but that was the best time to say, look, what you're doing is putting us in an impossible situation. How about helping us out in a way that doesn't cost you anything so you can still have your senior debt by having the federal government refinance the RUM bonds? So they would pay off the bondholders, and those bonds were at a discount, so they would buy them at a discount. And then they would lend us, they'd borrow money themselves through the Treasury, and then they would pay off those bonds. Now, what the reason is, these bonds would, once the money is owed to the federal government, they have no risk. And I'll explain why. The bondholders now have risk. We get the money from the federal government through the RUM, and then we pay the bondholders with that money. It goes into a fund, and then the fund pays the bondholders. So it looks like they're safe, because the general fund never sees it until after the bondholders are paid. Then out of the 200 and something million, there's $20 million left. That goes to the general fund. And so we don't control that. We've assigned it to a third party. But Puerto Rico happened several years ago when they had their crisis, and they went into this Title III thing, or whatever they call it. And all of a sudden, this money that's going into a separate fund is getting challenged by the federal government that they want to, it no longer goes there. The bondholders are going to lose. And so now the people in the Virgin Islands, the bondholders start getting nervous, and they want out. And so the prices dropped. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, because they had risk that the federal government might divert those funds. But if the money is owed to the federal government, if they're the bondholders, then you've got the RUM money coming from the federal government, going to the federal government. Unless they cheat themselves, they don't have any risk. It's the same money. Okay, so if the federal government took over our bonds at that point in time, they'd have no risk to their own taxpayers, because their own RUM money would pay their own bonds, and their own bondholders. And then we could also convert their 3% Treasury rate into a tax-free rate of 2% through what are called slugs. These are these are Treasury credits that are used to back municipal bonds so that they get a AAA Treasury rating. They're considered full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So that would give us a AAA full faith and credit rated municipal bond to sell, and the interest rate on that was 2% at the time. So we could reduce our interest costs from 7 to 2, save 5% on 1.2 billion. We would save $60 million a year in interest by doing this.
You know,
I can't guarantee the federal government will do that.
you know how I like to put it? If you're in the VI and you want to win a basketball game, put in Tim Duncan. If we want to fix our finances, you vote number 7, Warren Mosler, Ray Fonseca.
Well,
So if you got another 20 minutes, I'll tell you my alternative.
let me say this to you.
But look,
then.
I've been doing these, I did these financings for federal agencies for 15 years, so I'm fairly comfortable. I know what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah, and
You really give us 7 more minutes.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Elsie.
Yeah, we're now in the Mosler Fonseca administration.
Yes.
Okay? The general election went and you're successful.
Yes.
Governor and Lieutenant Governor. Let me inquire of you. When you land on your feet, how ready are you going forward, and what will be your primary or priority undertaking?
Okay, good. We, in our first 100 days, the Mosler Fonseca administration will, one, we're going to meet with the federal government and restructure the $175 million debt that Mosler just detailed. In addition to that, we are going to reduce the interest costs about $50 million per year. Two, the GER, testing. Yes. Two, the GERS and income taxes are going to be our priority. So we're going to donate the $600 million cover bonds to the GERS, and we're going to offer the employees voluntary lump sum retirement benefits.
Explain.
Okay, here is what it is. There's many people, if you go to GRS conferences, there's many of the employees have put in maybe about $70,000 into the system, and they don't have the confidence in the system, and they would like their money back. If we was to give them that $70,000, that reduces the unfunded liability, because over their lifespan, we might have to pay them $200,000 or more. So by giving them the $70,000, we reduce our unfunded liability for that particular person by $130,000. So the GERS, is that good? So then the GERS and income tax. Right now, the VI law requires that the Virgin Islands government deposit 10% of your income taxes in an account. So we're going to comply with the law. That's simple. It's the law. You have to comply with the law. Also, the government is required to deposit the 20.5% contributions to the GERS. All we need to do is do that, and those will begin to reduce the GERS, make it viable again. Okay, in addition to that, we are going to offer insurance to the private sector employees. And it's a matter of numbers. Right now, there's a pool of about 17,000 retired employees and current government employees. So if we was to bring in the private sector, that makes the pool, brings it up to about $35,000 in that bigger pool. That would reduce the rates. So those are the things that and of course that's legislation that we have to submit.
Excuse me. Let me go back to the idea of you're buying out people from GRS with a lump sum.
No, that's not what I said.
What'd you
Yeah,
say?
yeah.
Not buying out. We're offering them.
Well, that's
yeah,
another way to say it.
yeah, okay.
You're offering them
It's
a lump-
voluntary.
Yeah, it's
voluntary.
voluntary. I said voluntary lump sum. Yeah.
You seem to be putting a lot of stock in that. You think that's something that's going to sell, that's really going to go over well with people?
Okay, that's a good question, because there are employees that would like to get their money from the GR. I've spent 30 years working for the government. I've put in $70,000. I would like to get my $70,000. So we would give it to you. If you want it, we will give it to you.
Okay, I understand
Well,
that.
let me say, I was at the GRS conference, 400 people there on St. Croix maybe. I'd say 200 of them were there to demand their money back. Now, I don't know if they would go through with it, but all I'm saying is if they want it, I'm going to give it to them.
I understand it, but
Right.
I'm suggesting that to take that lump sum,
Yeah,
people are living longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be bad for the employee. It'd be good for the GERS.
Yeah,
And
that's what
remember,
I'm
as
saying.
the
Yeah,
government,
that's
we're
my
trying to
point. You
fix.
put it just the way, it is bad for you because people are living long. I can see somebody 62 years of age taking, $75,000. Fine. But they're going to live another 25 or 30 years.
Yeah.
That's the downside. And I just want to make sure that people understand.
Sure.
Yes,
the
we
import
fully
of
agree
that.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would not be financially in their best interest.
We're not going to try and sell this as a good deal. We're going to tell them, look, you're better off staying in. But if people, you either believe in personal freedom or you don't. And if they want their money out,
So you're suggesting
yeah.
that if it is a popular option and people exercise it, the system is dead?
Yeah, so like if, the contribution of, what's the contribution of a person per year?
Tier 1 is 11%, Tier
All right.
2 is 11.5%.
Okay, and the government does over 20, right?
20.5%.
Okay, so if somebody puts in 100,000 or 110,000, the government has to put in 200,000. So if the person takes their money out, the government doesn't have to put that 200,000 in because the guy's not in the plan. So
But the system is dead. Over
well-
time, the popularity of this program
yeah.
would effectively kill the system.
Well, it would be if the liabilities go down to zero and the assets go down to zero, nobody's hurt. That's okay. The only reason you have the assets are to pay the liabilities. The reason you have the money is to make the payments that you owe. If you eliminate what you owe and you don't have any money, you're okay. You're not bankrupt or anything.
Yeah, that would reduce the unfunded liability, and that is the big problem with the GERS. That would immediately reduce the unfunded liability.
If you owe $10,000 but you only have $5,000, you've got a problem. But if the lender says to you, you know what, I'll cut your debt in half. Just give me $5,000 and we're even. You give them the $5,000, you have less money, but you have less debt. Your debt's zero.
Let me see if I can
Yeah.
get to it
Yeah.
from another direction.
Okay.
Fonseca, forgive me, Muslim Fonseca doesn't think that we need a GERS or any system like that.
No,
No,
we think the system, the way it is now and the way, based on people's behavior and what they'd like to do, can honor everybody's wishes. We think we can honor the people's demands to get their money out. We think we can honor people's benefits, and we think we don't have to raise contributions.
How does the system survive? That's why I'm lost.
Well, you have employees who are continuing to have money taken out, and you have
The government making a contribution.
government contributions ongoing, and you have the $600 million of rum bonds making a contribution, and we have $700 million already in there. And we recognize that, and we're going to, again, accounting, anytime GERS money is used to pay income taxes, that money gets credited back to the GERS. We don't want GERS money funding the rest of the government. And so if they give you $3,000 and you pay $1,000 in taxes, the GERS only loses $2,000, not $3,000, because it paid $3,000 and got $1 back. Yeah, and so when we do these three things, it's not so bad off. Now, I won't say it's good forever, because in real life, nothing's forever, but we're looking at 10, 15 years, and I'm sure 5 years from now, it's going to be a completely new world with a whole different situation, and we're going to be making adjustments to everything like we always do, but it'll be responsible system that will honor its obligations.
Well, let me ask you this then.
Yeah.
How realistic is the alternative of setting up a 401k as a alternative to GERS? Is that realistic?
It's realistic, but what does it accomplish?
That's my question.
I don't know. You're still putting money in an account,
Yes.
and you put some in, the government puts something in, and then you get something at the end. What it does is it reduces the benefit. People who do 401ks wind up with a lot lower payment at the end of the 20 or 30 years than if they had the retirement fund.
Our plan is the only plan that will restore viability to the GERS. Because remember what we said, the deficit, the liabilities have been overstated because they are looking at it from a United States perspective. Remember, we get the federal taxes back. So any amount the GERS, for example, the GERS pays you $70,000. Well, guess what? If you have to pay taxes on it, that goes back to the government. So again, it's money that's still coming back to the government. Our plan restores the GERS to viability.
And legislatively, you're going to make sure that the taxes on any of that settlement is returned to GERS. You're
Right.
going to restrict that money to return it to
That's right.
Yeah, otherwise, you have GERS money paying for other services. Now, if we want to, that's called a tax, right? If we want to tax the GERS fund, I guess we can do that. But
Coward, yeah,
You have to-
definitely. The money has to go to the GERS. It can't go for any other fund to pay for anything else. It has to go back into the GERS. And that's what's been happening. Yeah.
it's like there have been very subtle ways to rob some of these funds and then blame other reasons, other things on it. We've been doing the same thing, robbing our hospitals of money. If a hospital bills the insurance companies, if you get sick and they bill for the patients and they bill the insurance companies $10 million, then they pay the doctors and the nurses $10 million, and you say, oh, you don't have enough money for Band-Aids. You don't have enough money for supplies and pay your WAPA bills. But when they paid $10 million to the employees, $3 million came back to the government in income taxes. Okay, that money, so what was the real cost to the hospital? What was the real cost to the government to have these employees? It wasn't 10, it was 7. It paid 10, it got 3 back. Right now, there's $3 million left from the insurance money to pay for all these other things, and the hospital doesn't look so bad. Well, because we've been using, hospital insurance money to fund the rest of government and making it look like the hospital is losing money, we're calling the hospital a disaster and cutting back on it. So proper accounting is just keeping track. So keeping track of things properly gives you more insight into what to do and how to structure things and where to put your resources and how to make things work for public purpose, to serve the community.
Well, in terms of the other things, any other priorities you may have, talk to me a little bit about public safety. What's your thinking on that?
Okay, public safety is one of our platform items, and we're going to enhance public safety. Remember, we're going to fully fund the forensic lab. We're also going to install, strategically located cameras. Those cameras have been, very efficient. Of course, you need to have an adequately trained public safety. We have to go back to the days when they had the community-oriented policing. You had the PAL, where when a crime was committed, people would actually go and tell the police. We have an issue now in our community where a lot of the times, 12 gunshot fired, people around, there's a body there, and nobody ain't see, they ain't hear, they ain't know nothing.
Well,
so we got to change that.
And that's one of the things I read in your platform, and one of the things that was conspicuously absent is the idea of putting more policemen on the streets. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that's a universal in terms of its people understanding its effectiveness as a deterrent in local crime.
Agreed.
Okay, so I'd like to know that you could make a commitment to do something like that.
Agreed.
So
yes.
people can feel free to come out at night.
That's right. Definitely.
The wealthier communities have a little guard gate, and they have somebody in there. We could have night watchmen at all our communities if we wanted to. They're not expensive. It would be an extension of the police department, and they just need a radio, and they're not going to go out and arrest anybody or anything like that. It's just kind of an information center, somebody watching all night with a light, and it seems to work wonders in communities that do things like that. But a lot of communities can't afford it, so we should be publicly funding that.
And on that note, Step Up to Truth thanks the Mosler Fonseca gubernatorial team. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Prior to our departure, let me inform the community that On October 5th, which is next Friday, Step Up to Truth will have graced its forum the gubernatorial team of Nap Potter. So we're looking forward to that. Underwriters for this evening's forum are Step Up to Truth, WSTA Radio, Focus VI Radio Magazine, VI Dental Center, University of the Virgin Islands, Music and Digital Media Incorporated, and the Virgin Islands Daily News. Step Up to Truth hereby brings to a close the September 28, 2018 edition of its 2018 VI Gubernatorial Fora. Thank you and good night.